My mother died on a Tuesday, alone in the same beach cottage she'd bought for $280,000 back in 1984, the same cottage where I'd spent every summer morning scrubbing salt off the windows and every winter afternoon patching the cedar siding with my own 2 hands. 3 days after her funeral, my brother Mark tossed a dented recipe tin into a black garbage bag and told me he was cleaning out the clutter. Inside that tin, behind 40 years of index cards and grease-stained clippings, I found a stack of letters my mother had written to me in secret. The last one said, "Mark will forge a will, do not trust him, save the cottage." Today, Mark logs on to the vacation rental platform I co-founded, uses a prepaid credit card and a fake name, and pays me $300 a night to stay in the very cottage he tried to steal from me. I'd been an ER nurse for 26 years, the kind who could read a patient's oxygen saturation from across the triage bay and spot a forged insurance card before the clerk finished typing a name. I worked weekend doubles, holiday shifts nobody else wanted, and night call in a county hospital so understaffed that learning to do 3 things at once was just survival. Every extra dollar I earned went into the cottage, not a beach house you'd see on a postcard, just a 1-story cedar and stucco place on stilts a block from the Gulf, with a screened porch my mother had always wanted me to fix, and a roof I replaced myself in 2009 after Hurricane Ike peeled half the shingles off. Mark, my younger brother, had never swung a hammer in his life. He lived in a 2-bedroom loft in downtown Houston that our mother paid for until the day she died. His job, when he bothered to hold one, was selling luxury watches on commission, a career that sounded impressive at cocktail parties and consistently failed to cover his American Express bill. He drove a leased Porsche Cayenne, wore Italian loafers on the beach, and referred to our family cottage as the rustic asset. I was the daughter who showed up, and he was the son who talked about showing up while someone else paid the bill. By the time Mom passed at 76, the cottage was worth close to $600,000, but its value to me had nothing to do with money. It was where I'd held her hand after her stroke, where I'd cooked her bland, low-sodium meals, and argued with insurance adjusters from the kitchen phone while she napped in her recliner. I kept every receipt for the roof, the new HVAC unit, the plumbing upgrades, the property taxes, the flood insurance premiums that climbed every year like clockwork. I didn't do it for an inheritance. I did it because she was my mother, and I am a woman who shows up, and I figured that when she was gone the cottage would pass to both of us, and I'd buy Mark out fair and square with the equity I'd built. That was my quiet assumption, the kind you never question until the ground shifts under you. 3 days after the funeral, Mark and his wife Vanessa appeared at the cottage. They arrived in the Porsche, towing a U-Haul trailer packed with empty cardboard boxes and a label maker, ready to manage the estate. It was barely 9 in the morning, and already the Gulf humidity was so thick you could taste salt on your tongue. Vanessa wore a white linen jumpsuit that looked like it cost more than the water heater I'd installed in the garage, and she kept checking her phone while Mark gave me a stiff hug and started talking about appraisal timelines. They wasted no time. By noon, Mark had pulled every drawer in the kitchen and hall cabinets, sorting objects into keep and donate, which mostly meant anything he didn't recognize went straight into heavy-duty contractor bags. I stood in the doorway, watching him grab my mother's recipe tin from the pantry shelf. It was a 1950s biscuit tin, faded red with gold filigree, the lid jammed tight from rust and decades of coastal humidity. He shook it once, heard the rattle of old metal cards, and tossed it into a bag with a dozen mismatched coffee mugs. He said, "This junk has been here for decades. It's just garbage." Vanessa nodded without looking up from her phone, typing something about the estate sale they'd already scheduled on an app. I said nothing. I let him tie the bag and stack it by the door, and then I waited until he and Vanessa drove off for takeout sushi, saying they'd be back in an hour. The moment their taillights disappeared, I retrieved that tin like a paramedic digging for a pulse. The bag was heavy with chipped plates and old curtains, and the tin was at the bottom, still intact. I pried it open with a flathead screwdriver from my truck toolbox. The metal groaned and released a puff of stale air that smelled like vanilla extract and newsprint. Inside, underneath 5 inches of handwritten recipe cards for pecan pie and cornbread dressing, I found a bundle of letters bound with a white hair ribbon. The envelopes had no stamps, no addresses, just my name in my mother's shaky cursive. She'd been writing to me for years, sealing the letters inside the tin, never giving them to me as if she knew someone else might read them. The first few were ordinary, sweet things about hummingbirds on the porch, her favorite summer thunderstorms, and my grandmother's biscuit recipe. Then I found a thicker letter dated 10 months before she died, on the back of a pharmacy receipt, saying she'd overheard Mark talking to Vanessa about the will situation and asking me to call a lawyer she'd spoken to in Reed County. There were other letters too, written during her hospital stay, detailing how Mark had visited with a man he introduced as a financial advisor, who was really just a notary he'd paid off. She described the way Vanessa had praised her for being so cooperative while sliding papers across the bed tray. The very last letter was dated 6 months before her passing, shortly after her stroke, written on a sheet of lined paper with the hospital logo at the top. It said, "Anna, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I need you to know I tried to fix it, but I ran out of time. Mark visited me in the hospital with papers I didn't understand. He brought his Gulf friends as witnesses. He said he was updating the will to protect the Cottage from probate, but I overheard him on the phone with Vanessa saying they'd cut you out entirely. I begged him to stop. He said you'd been renting the Cottage all those years and had no claim. Do not trust him. Save the Cottage. I hid the real will with a lawyer named Helen Cross in Reed County. Call her. I'm so sorry I wasn't strong enough to fight him." I read those words 3 times, the paper trembling in my hands, and I felt a cold, crystalline clarity replace the fog of grief. My mother had known, and she'd done her best to arm me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe family should be built on trust, not treachery. The next morning, Mark sat me down at the kitchen table with a manila folder and a solemn expression that looked practiced in a mirror. He slid out a document titled Last Will and Testament, printed on thick cream paper with an elaborate border, signed by our mother, and witnessed by 2 men I'd never met but whose penmanship looked suspiciously like the kind you practice on a golf scorecard. He said, "Mom left the cottage to me, Anna. It says so right here. But I'm not going to leave you homeless. You've been renting it, right? All those years you were just paying rent to Mom, and now that she's gone, you'll keep living here. I'll even take care of the taxes. You just need to sign this quitclaim deed so I can handle the title cleanly." Vanessa hovered by the counter, nodding sympathetically and saying, "We just want what's best for you, sweetie. You've been through so much. This way you don't have to worry about probate or lawyers. It's such a relief." The quitclaim deed was a 3-page legal document with a blank signature line for me and a notary acknowledgement block already prepared. Mark had even highlighted the signature line with a yellow sticky arrow. He'd paper-clipped a pen to the top of the form, a nice gel rollerball, as if the right stationery would make me sign without reading. My first instinct was to scream. I had 30 years of mortgage statements in a fireproof box, cancelled checks and maintenance invoices in my mother's own handwriting acknowledging my contributions. But I saw the letters in my mind, and the warning echoed in my skull, "Do not trust him." So I did what an ER nurse does when a patient's crashing and the room is full of panicked family members. I went still. I let my eyes go vague, my shoulders slump, my voice soften to a whisper. I said, "I don't understand legal stuff, Mark. I'm just so tired. Can we figure this out later? I can't think right now." He and Vanessa exchanged a glance, and I saw the predator calculation in it, the tiny smirk of relief that I was falling into line. Within 10 minutes they'd reframed my grief as confusion and offered to move me into their guest room in Houston for a few weeks until we sort everything out. Vanessa patted my hand and said, "We'll take such good care of you, Anna, you just need rest." I let them pack my bag, I let them drive me away, and I played the role of the broken, compliant older sister so perfectly they never once suspected I was gathering every piece of evidence I needed to destroy them. Their house was a new-build townhouse in a gated community where the HOA fined residents for leaving a hose visible in the front yard. The guest room had a memory foam mattress and a window overlooking their neighbor's security floodlight. I settled in like a convalescent. I shuffled. I asked Mark to explain simple things twice. I pretended phone notifications confused me, and I watched. Every morning Vanessa would leave for spin class in Lululemon gear and return with shopping bags from high-end boutiques. I noticed the credit card offers stacked on the kitchen island, pre-approved limits entirely maxed out, lavender-scented envelopes with "You've been selected" typed across the front. I overheard Mark on the phone, voice tight, telling someone he could restructure the balloon payment on the loft, that he just needed 6 more weeks, that the cottage sale would close by then and he'd have the liquidity. I saw a late notice from the loft's mortgage servicer tucked under a stack of mail, with the words "Notice of Intent to Accelerate" printed in bold, the kind that means foreclosure is 90 days away. He was planning to sell the cottage. Not to keep it in the family, not to preserve our mother's memory, but to liquidate it and pay off his own debts, which I soon realized were far deeper than a late Amex payment. The cottage was his emergency exit, and I was being cast as the doormat he'd wipe his feet on while walking out. The reckoning came during a small domestic disaster that was pure luck. One evening, a pipe under the kitchen sink burst. It was a cheap braided supply line, corroded from Houston's hard water, and water sprayed across the cabinets before Mark could find the shut-off valve. He stood there with a dish towel, shouting at Vanessa to call a plumber, while I listened to him argue on the phone with a 24-hour service that wanted a $200 emergency fee just to show up. I'd been making myself quietly useful all week, wiping counters and folding laundry, so when I knelt down and said, "Let me look," nobody thought twice. I shut off the angle stop, grabbed the adjustable wrench from my truck toolbox that I'd had the foresight to keep in the trunk when they moved me, and in 10 minutes I'd removed the ruined supply line and capped the valve with a half-inch brass plug from my emergency kit. I'd done this exact repair twice at the cottage, fixing the same cheap braided lines that fail after 5 years of thermal expansion. Mark stared at me like I'd performed open-heart surgery. Vanessa said, "I didn't know you could do that." I just smiled and said, "You pick things up when you can't afford plumbers." That was my first slip. I recovered by adding, "Mom taught me a few things and they bought it because they'd always underestimated me." That night, while Mark and Vanessa argued about their credit card balance in the living room, their voices rising then dropping to fierce whispers about whose spending was worse, I walked past Mark's home office. The door was ajar, and I could see a metal filing cabinet in the corner, a 2-drawer unit with a cheap cam lock. I'd seen similar locks on hospital narcotics cabinets that required specific key codes, but this one was consumer grade. Cam locks are jokes. They are designed to keep out a toddler, not a woman who'd read a dozen lock-picking forums during late nights when I couldn't sleep after double shifts. My mother's cedar chest at the cottage had an old warded lock that I'd learned to open with a bent Barbie pin when I was 12, and the principle for this filing cabinet was even simpler. I slipped a small flathead screwdriver from my purse and a straight Barbie pin I'd straightened and bent into a tiny tension wrench. I inserted the screwdriver into the keyway, applied gentle rotational pressure to tension the lock's internal plug, then raked the pin stack with the Barbie pin a few times. The trick is to keep steady tension so the driver pins don't reset while you're raking. It took me less than 30 seconds. The plug turned with a soft click, and I eased the top drawer open, careful to muffle any noise with a folded towel I'd grabbed from the guest bathroom. Inside, Mark had organized his scheme with the obsessive neatness of a man who thinks he's smarter than the system. The hanging folder labeled Cottage Plan contained a draft copy of the forged will, printed on the same paper stock as the one he'd shown me, complete with a mock-up of our mother's signature that he'd traced from an old birthday card. There was a handwritten timeline in his own blocky script, detailing when to obtain the forged signatures from his golf buddies, when to present the will to probate, and a note. "Anna will cave if we play the helpless sister card. She's got no fight left." Attached to it was a quitclaim deed already filled out with my name and the cottage's legal description, waiting only for my notarized signature. But the real treasure was a separate file documenting his finances, a personal financial statement prepared for a bank showing over $300,000 in unsecured debt, a pending foreclosure notice on the Houston loft, and a loan origination application where he'd listed the cottage as collateral for a bridge loan, contingent on probate clearing. There was also a credit report he'd pulled on himself, showing a credit score in the low 500s and multiple collections accounts, one for a boat he'd bought and couldn't afford to dock. He intended to sign over the cottage, extract every dollar of equity, and leave me with nothing except the legal liability of having been the tenant, who might be sued for back rent if his plan worked. I photographed every page with my phone, uploaded them to a secure cloud server I used for the rental platform I was building, and slid the drawer closed without a trace. The lock clicked back into place as if no one had touched it. 2 days later, while Vanessa was at a tennis lesson and Mark was pacing in the backyard on a call about a missed payment, I stepped into the guest bathroom, locked the door, and dialed the number from the letter. I'd memorized it, but I also had it saved in a notes app under a fake contact name, Heather C., in case my phone was checked. Helen Cross answered on the second ring. She was an estate attorney in Reed County, a sharp-voiced woman in her late 60s who'd known my mother from church and had handled the original will my mother executed 6 years before her death. Helen said, "Your mother came to me about a year before her stroke and said she was afraid Mark would try something. She'd put the cottage into a revocable trust with herself as trustee and you as beneficiary, but she wanted something stronger. So we drafted a last will that left the cottage to you outright, with a codicil that any subsequent will not bearing the raised seal of the Reed County Notary's official stamp would be void. She had me file the original will with the probate court, sealed, cross-referenced to a confidential file number only you and I know. Your brother's forged will has no notary seal, just witness signatures, which means it's legally worthless. But we need more than evidence to prosecute fraud. We need to catch him in the act of trying to enforce it. She paused, then said, I've been waiting for your call, Anna. And I have a plan. Over the next 20 minutes she walked me through the strategy. She'd already contacted the bank manager at Gulf Coast Mutual, where the trust account was housed, a man named Mr. Arkaffer, who had agreed to cooperate. He could flag any attempt to use the forged will and have a compliance officer ready to verify documents on the spot. Helen also had on retainer a certified forensic document examiner, Dr. Letitia Harmon, who could compare the forged signature to known exemplars within an hour if we needed an expert opinion at the moment of confrontation. Helen said, You keep acting weak, keep pretending you'll sign. Let Mark schedule the bank meeting. We'll have everything in place. One more thing, we need to prove he's utterly without conscience. If you can get a recording of him showing disregard for your life when he thinks you're in medical distress, that will sink any sympathy he might try to squeeze from a jury. I told her about the fake collapse I'd been considering, and she said, Do it, but make it airtight. The cruelty beat arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Mark had been pressuring me for days to come to the bank and sign the final paperwork, his voice growing frayed with each delay I manufactured. He'd started leaving the quitclaim deed on the kitchen table with a pen beside it, as if I might sign it absent-mindedly while eating breakfast. That morning I told him I felt dizzy, that my chest had been tight all night, and that maybe my blood pressure was bottoming out, something I knew well from treating septic patients. He glanced at Vanessa, who said, Let's just get this done first. You can rest later. I stood up from the sofa, took 3 wobbly steps and let my knees buckle. I've trained for codes. I know how to fall without injuring myself, how to keep my airway open, how to fake a non-responsiveness that looks terrifying to a layperson. I sprawled on the hardwood floor, one arm twisted, my breath shallow, my pulse deliberately irregular when I pressed my own wrist. I moaned the way stroke patients do, a low guttural sound that vibrated in my throat. The audio recording app on my phone, hidden in my blouse pocket with the microphone facing outward, was already running. Mark froze. Then he walked around my body, not over it but around it, stepping carefully to avoid my outstretched hand, and he grabbed the manila folder with the quitclaim deed from the coffee table. I heard him flip through the pages, then he said, Vanessa, check her purse for her ID. We need her license if they ask. If we get her to the bank while she's still out, we might not need a notary. They'll accept a DocuSign if she's barely conscious. Vanessa knelt down next to me, not to check for a pulse but to rummage through my bag. She didn't call 911. She didn't check my airway. She looked at Mark and said, Her license is here. Let's just get her to the car. Prop her up between us and she can sign in the back seat. I have been a nurse for 26 years. I've held the hands of 27 people as they died. I've never once seen another human being treat an unresponsive person as a logistical problem to be managed. That was the moment the last filament of familial love inside me went dark. I let them splutter and fret for another 30 seconds, then I groaned, blinked and sat up, saying I must have blacked out, that I felt better, that we should go. And I recorded every second of it. The next morning Mark told me he'd scheduled a family appointment at a branch of Gulf Coast Mutual Bank in Reed County. He said it was to update the signature cards for the estate account, a lie so thin it wouldn't have held a drop of water. I dressed in a faded blouse and flat shoes, looking every inch the docile sister, and I rode in the back seat of the Porsche while Vanessa drove and Mark rehearsed his lines under his breath. When we walked into the bank, a polished lobby with marble floors and a brass-trimmed teller counter, Helen Cross was already seated at a small conference table near the safe deposit boxes, dressed in a navy blazer, with a leather folio open in front of her. Beside her sat Mr. Arkaffer, the bank manager, and standing near the door was a uniformed compliance officer I hadn't met. Mark assumed Helen was the bank's trust officer, which in a way she was. Her firm had been the registered agent for the trust for years. He smiled his watch salesman's smile and said, We're here to finalize a quitclaim transfer. My sister is signing over her tenancy rights. Helen looked at me. I gave a small nod. Then Mr. Arkaffer stepped forward and said, Before we proceed, we need to verify the identity of all parties and the chain of title. Given the amount of equity involved, bank policy requires a full document review. He opened a binder and withdrew a document sealed in a plastic sleeve, the genuine last will and testament filed with the probate court. He placed it on the table next to Mark's forged will. The difference was obvious. My mother's real signature was fluid, with the distinct flourish on the S that matched every birthday card and insurance form I'd ever seen. The forged version was a traced approximation, stiff and slightly shaky, missing the characteristic leftward tilt. More importantly, Marksville had no raised notary seal, just the ink signatures of two men named Brian and Carl. The real will had the embossed seal of the Reed County notary, dated and recorded, its circular impression clearly visible through the plastic. Helen then produced a sworn affidavit from Dr. Letitia Harmon, the forensic document examiner, who had compared the signature on the forged will to more than 40 known exemplars from my mother's files, checks, insurance forms, greeting cards, and identified 7 distinct points of divergence including pen pressure, stroke sequence, and the angle of the terminal hooks, conclusively deeming it an amateur traceover forgery. Mark's face went from smug to ashen in the space of a heartbeat. He said, "What is this? That's not valid. Mom signed my will in front of witnesses." Helen said, "Your mother signed a codicil that voids any subsequent will lacking the official county notary seal. You and your golf buddies didn't know that and you didn't bother to check. The forged will is legally extinct. The probate court will recognize this one, and it leaves the cottage to Anna in its entirety." Vanessa started whispering urgently, but Mark shouted, "She's not competent. She's been disoriented for weeks. I have documentation." That's when I stepped forward, straightened my posture, and said the line I'd been holding in my chest since the day I found that tin. I said, "I'm not signing anything, Mark. You forged a will, you committed fraud, and I have every phone call and every photo to prove it. You stepped over me when you thought I was dying. You don't get to play the victim now." The compliance officer, who had been listening by the door, opened it and signaled. 2 uniformed officers from the Reed County Sheriff's Office, who had been waiting in the branch manager's office, walked into the lobby. They arrested Mark on a felony charge of forgery with intent to defraud. Vanessa tried to backpedal, claiming she'd been manipulated, but a detective I'd been cooperating with appeared and took her in for questioning as an accessory. I watched them both led out in handcuffs, and I didn't feel triumph. I felt the same quiet exhaustion I'd felt after a 12-hour trauma shift, the exhaustion of a task completed, a life saved, and the knowledge that I would sleep that night without my mother's voice in my head saying, "Do not trust him." I'd trusted her instead, and she'd been right all along. The criminal case moved through the court system with the efficiency of a well-illuminated trail of evidence. My photographs, the audio recording of Mark's callous disregard during my fake collapse, and the testimony of the golf buddies who admitted they'd been told they were witnessing a simple update, but never actually saw our mother sign anything, all combined to sink him. Dr. Harmon's forensic analysis was entered into the record, and the jury took less than 2 hours to convict. Mark pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of attempted fraud before sentencing, and was given 3 years in state prison, with 5 years of probation and full financial restitution for legal fees. Vanessa divorced him before the ink dried on the indictment, filing for an annulment on the grounds of fraud, and taking whatever assets remained in her own name. The Houston loft was foreclosed, the Porsche repossessed, and the mountain of credit card debt landed on his shoulders without an asset to cushion the fall. He left prison broke, unemployed, and flagged in every banking system as a convicted fraudster, which meant he couldn't open a checking account without a co-signer, and would carry that scarlet letter for the rest of his life. For my part, I received what was always mine. The probate court issued an order naming me the sole owner of the cottage, free and clear of any claims. I spent 6 months renovating it with my own hands and a hired contractor for the big stuff. I reinforced the stilts, installed impact windows, refinished the pine floors, and outfitted the kitchen with new appliances I'd budgeted for over 2 decades. And when the work was done, I listed it on the vacation rental platform I'd quietly built over the past 7 years. Let me tell you about that platform, because it's not a casual side gig. It was my second act, born from exhaustion and a need to build something no one could take away. For years I had taken online coding courses between night shifts, teaching myself Python, JavaScript, and enough back-end architecture to build a booking engine that connected property owners with guests along the Gulf Coast. I launched it as Coastal Stay in 2019, a direct competitor to the big national sites, with lower fees and better insurance for hosts. By the time my mother died, Coastal Stay had 40 properties on its roster and was generating a modest income that helped cover the cottage taxes. After I took legal ownership, I made the cottage the flagship property. I photographed it myself, with my mother's rocking chair on the porch and the sea oats visible beyond the dune. I wrote the listing description in her voice, This cottage was built by a woman who believed in the healing power of salt air and early morning coffee. We hope you find the same peace here that she did. Within 2 months, it had a 5-star rating and a 6-month waitlist for peak summer weeks. 2 years after Mark's conviction, I was reviewing bookings one evening when an alert popped up on my admin dashboard. Coastal Stay's fraud detection system flagged a reservation attempt from a prepaid credit card registered to a name that matched a known alias on probation check-in forms. I clicked through and saw the driver's license uploaded for verification. It was Mark, using his legal name but a newly issued card, booking a weekend stay for 2 guests. The timing aligned with his early release for good behavior. He'd chosen the cottage, apparently not recognizing that it was listed on my platform, probably because he'd never cared enough to learn the name of the site and just searched for cheap beach rentals. The rate was $300 a night, plus a cleaning fee and booking tax, totaling just over $700 for a Friday through Sunday stay. I stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling something I can only describe as the quiet alignment of a universe that occasionally remembers to balance its scales. I considered cancelling the reservation. I considered reporting it to his parole officer, and then I approved it. I sent him the automated confirmation email, the one that includes the cottage address, the keypad entry code, and a cheery, "We can't wait to host you" guest signature from the Coastal Stay team. I was the host and the team and the woman who would not be there to greet him. The weekend arrived. I monitored the cottage through the smart security system I'd installed, which gave me a live feed of the driveway and porch. At 3:02 p.m. on a Friday, a rideshare pulled up, and Mark stepped out with a woman I didn't recognize. He was thinner, his hair grayer, wearing cheap sneakers and a polo shirt that gaped at the collar. He punched the door code, and the lock clicked open. I watched him walk into the living room, and I knew he saw it immediately. On the wall above the sofa, I'd hung a framed photograph of me and my mother standing on the porch, taken the day we replaced the roof. Beneath it, a small brass plaque read, "In memory of the woman who built this home, and the daughter who saved it." The security feed didn't have audio, but I saw his mouth open, then his shoulders sag, as he realized where he was and whose bed he'd be sleeping in. He turned in a slow circle, scanned the room, spotted the Coastal Stay welcome binder on the coffee table with my name listed as the property owner and host. He stood there for a full minute, motionless, while his companion pulled a swimsuit from her bag and asked what was wrong. Then he walked to the door, stepped onto the porch, and looked directly at the security camera I'd mounted under the eave. I was watching from my living room in the townhouse I'd bought with the rental proceeds, 90 miles away. I raised a coffee mug in a silent toast, and I smiled. Mark stayed the full weekend. The penalty for cancelling within 48 hours of check-in was non-refundable after all, and I imagine he didn't have the money to lose. He posted no review, submitted no complaint. The automated system sent him a follow-up email asking him to rate his stay, and he ignored it. But the charge cleared. He paid me $300 a night, plus taxes and fees, to occupy the cottage he'd tried to steal, to make his coffee in the kitchen I'd renovated using the skills he'd marked, to sleep in the guest room where I'd once lain awake cataloguing his treachery, and to check out by 11 a.m. Sunday like any other guest. It was the most satisfying transaction I've ever processed on a platform I built from scratch, and every cent of it went into a maintenance fund I'd set up for the cottage's long-term care. I like to think my mother would have laughed, that deep full laugh she had when she thought something was both perfectly just and a little bit wicked. I still list the cottage on Coastal Stay. It's booked solid through the end of next year. I sometimes picture Mark scrolling through rental listings late at night, seeing the photo of the porch where I taught myself to code, the one where the morning sunlight hits the screen door just right, and knowing that he can never afford to stay there again, not on the terms he wants. And every time a payment lands in my account, I remember the weight of that recipe tin in my hands, the rust on the lid, the ribbon around the letters, and the way a woman who couldn't fight for herself in her final years managed to fight for me across time and death with the only weapon she had left. The truth, hidden in a biscuit tin, waiting for the daughter who would never stop showing up. Integrity isn't an inheritance you can forge, it's a choice you make every single day, and my mother made hers in secret, trusting that I would find it. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more true tales of family betrayal and unexpected justice. I'll see you in the next one.